Have you ever wondered how a single wrong decision, one innocent action, could lead to a tragic event? Imagine a couple going kayaking on one of the most dangerous days of the year. It was supposed to be just another adventure, but it ended in such a shocking way that I still can't wrap my head around this story. Folks, where do you think the line is between truth and mistake? How can one small action or word change everything? Will you be able to make up your own mind about this story, or will it leave you questioning every detail? Stay with me because the most intriguing parts are yet to come. When everything falls apart in an instant, every action you take can turn against you. A single word spoken in a moment of shock can become a weapon in the hands of justice. Angelica's story is an example of how an unexpected chain of events can change a life forever. The Hudson Valley is an idyllic spot for outdoor adventures. The stunning nature and swift river draw those who crave a thrill. Kayaking is a favorite sport for risk-takers, but the river can be merciless. Experienced athletes know this, but sometimes even they aren't immune to mistakes. Angelica Grawald and Vincent Viafor loved the water. To them, it was a symbol of freedom and closeness. On that fateful evening of April 19, 2015, they set out on the Hudson once again, full of excitement. Both were used to challenges and had years of experience behind them. But that day, the Hudson was not on their side. The rising winds stirred up powerful waves, and despite their instincts telling them to turn back, they decided to push forward. Their destination was an island with a castle inspired by Scottish traditions, a place that drew them every time with its mystery and ancient atmosphere. They spent the day enjoying nature, but when evening came, the situation took a sudden turn. The strong waves and icy waters were an ominous sign, but they had no choice but to head back. Staying on the island without gear for an overnight stay was just too risky. When Vincent's kayak began to take on water, the situation took a tragic turn. Without a life jacket and in the cold water, Vincent found himself in a critical situation. Angelica, overwhelmed by shock, called emergency services in desperation. She explained that she couldn't reach him due to the powerful waves and that the current was pulling him further away. The dispatcher struggled to pinpoint the couple's location, further complicating the situation. Time was slipping away, and every second counted. Vincent was already slipping under the water when rescuers set out to find him, but by the time they reached the area, it was too late. Vincent was nowhere to be seen. From the shore, the darkening sky only added to the somber mood of the event. Let's learn a bit more about Angelica. At 35, Angelica was a woman with serious ambitions. She was pursuing photography and saw it as her future. However, her real name was Angelica Liss. Originally from Latvia, she sought a better life beyond her homeland. 2 marriages, 2 divorces, but her goal remained the same. She wanted to settle in the US, obtain a work visa, and build a career. She got lucky. She landed a job as a nanny and moved to the States, but the real changes began when she met Vincent. At 46, Vincent had been through 2 divorces and was successful in the construction business. Despite the age gap, their relationship progressed quickly. Now, let's take a closer look at Vincent. Vincent was a generous person. He hosted parties, gathered friends, and led a lively and active life. It was at one of these gatherings that he and Angelica met. Just a few weeks later, she moved into his home in a small town called Poughkeepsie, New York. Their relationship moved fast. Talks about marriage and children became a regular topic, but beneath the surface, there were issues brewing, which only intensified the day before the tragic event. On April 18, 2015, just a day before the accident, Vincent and Angelica went to another party. Vincent was having a good time with his friends, but Angelica left early, claiming she wasn't feeling well. She barely interacted with others and seemed distant. Vincent's friends noticed the tension between them, which escalated into a minor but noticeable disagreement. However, nothing significant happened that evening. They went their separate ways that night, reuniting only the following morning. That's when Vincent shared his plans for kayaking. He was determined for them to patch things up and head out on the Hudson River to spend some quality time together. Let's go back to that tragic day. Despite the cold weather and increasing wind, Angelica agreed to the idea. The couple planned to visit Bannerman's castle, located on an island in the middle of the river, for a photo session. Angelica brought along elegant outfits for various shots, hoping to capture some great images. By noon, they were at the water's edge, ready for another adventure, but the wind, which was growing stronger, seemed to foreshadow trouble. Massive waves rose around them, and the cold made every movement stiff. Angelica noticed the worsening weather. But Vincent's love for adrenaline and his stubbornness pushed them to continue. Before setting off, Vincent said something that Angelica would never forget: "This will be the adventure of your life." Those words would take on a new, haunting meaning just hours later. The journey to the castle went smoothly. Angelica told the police that they had shared a couple of beers before setting off, just to set the mood. They both knew they needed to stay sober, given they had to make their way back. But despite this, everything changed on the way back. Vincent started to fall behind as the waves grew taller. He shouted that his kayak was taking on water. Angelica turned around and saw his vessel sinking. She tried to turn back, but the tidal current pushed her toward the shore. Once she reached land, she called emergency services, but by that time, Vincent had already disappeared into the cold waters of the Hudson River. The evening of April 19, 2015, marked the beginning of a search that lasted through the night and into the next day. Divers plunged into the murky waters of the Hudson, searching for Vincent's body, while a sonar-equipped boat battled fog and rough waves. Rescue helicopters scoured the area, but all efforts were unsuccessful. Vincent's family was in a state of shock and panic, struggling to cope with the tragedy. His loved ones and friends held on to a sliver of hope that somehow he had managed to survive, despite the freezing water and strong current. Yet even they knew the odds were slim. Paradoxically, among all the concerned people, Angelica appeared the calmest. She continued to update her social media, posting photos and videos as if nothing had happened. This behavior deeply upset Vincent's family, who felt her actions were inappropriate and even suspicious. She claimed she was holding on to hope, waiting for her fiancé to return, but her words did not resonate with the grieving relatives. 10 days after Vincent's disappearance, Angelica found herself back at the police station for another round of questioning. It was all due to a seemingly offhand comment she had made during her initial conversation with detectives. She mentioned that she might have accidentally removed the drain plug from Vincent's kayak on the way back. This small detail drastically shifted the course of the investigation. Suddenly, there were more questions than answers, and the theory that Vincent's death was simply an accident started to seem less likely. In addition, Angelica told the detectives that Vincent's paddle was also damaged. It had lost a locking ring, which made it difficult to row properly. This only heightened the detectives' suspicions, leading them to consider the possibility of foul play. A broken paddle and a missing plug, these details troubled investigators. Combined, these small elements gave the police reason to suspect that Angelica may have intentionally set things up for Vincent to drown. But what would have driven her to do this? The motive remained a mystery, and without it, the entire picture felt incomplete. To shed light on her possible motives, investigators started reaching out to people who knew both Angelica and Vincent. The police contacted Angelica's ex-boyfriend, Michael Coven, with whom she had lived several years earlier. Michael was shocked when he learned about the suspicion surrounding Angelica but admitted he couldn't completely rule out such an outcome. He revealed that beneath her calm and composed exterior was a darker side. During certain moments, particularly when they had been drinking, Angelica could become confrontational and start arguments, something Vincent, according to Michael, tolerated quietly. However, just a couple of weeks before the tragedy, Vincent confided to a friend that he was seriously questioning whether he should marry her. He described her as manipulative and aggressive, especially when she lost control. During questioning, Angelica admitted that there were indeed conflicts in the relationship but claimed they were solely related to their personal life. Her ambiguous statements and vague language made the detectives suspicious. More and more details pointed to the possibility that Vincent's death was not an accident, but a carefully planned tragedy. The motive turned out to be more significant than initially expected. Beyond relationship issues and anger, Angelica had a specific financial incentive. She was the primary beneficiary of Vincent's life insurance policy, valued at approximately $500,000. It was a large sum that could solve her financial problems and offer her a fresh start. At the time, Angelica was unemployed, and this money could drastically change her future. These new revelations shifted Angelica from the role of grieving fiancée to the prime suspect. Despite this, she continued to insist on her innocence. However, the prosecution charged her with second-degree criminal wrongdoing, and she was detained with a bail set at $9 million, an amount she could hardly afford. Given her foreign nationality, investigators feared she might attempt to flee, so Angelica remained in custody, awaiting trial. Angelica's defense argued that the statements she made during the 11-hour interrogation were not legally binding. Her attorney insisted that Vincent's body had still not been recovered and that, without forensic evidence, it was impossible to confirm any foul play or intentional wrongdoing. Her attorney argued that Vincent's death was a tragic accident. According to him, the kayak capsized due to a wave, and the drain plug might have come loose later when the vessel started sinking. To support their version of events, the defense organized an experiment on the Hudson River. A person with a similar build to Vincent sat in a kayak of the same model. The tests revealed that the vessel was sitting extremely low in the water, just a few inches above the surface, even on a calm day. This demonstrated that large waves could easily fill the kayak with water, even if the plug hadn't been dislodged. Additionally, the attorney reminded everyone that Vincent had been under the influence of alcohol, which could have impaired his coordination and reaction time. A flooded kayak, questionable confessions, and experiments on the water, all of this sparked intense debate. Vincent's body was still missing, but the investigation was gaining momentum. The main point of contention was the drain plug, a tiny opening no bigger than a fingertip. It was hard to believe that such a small detail could have caused such a tragedy. The drain opening on Vincent's kayak was located on top, making it unlikely that it could have let in enough water to cause the vessel to sink. Doubts continued to grow, and Angelica's lawyer insisted on further experiments to shed light on this mystery. An exact simulation was conducted, the same type of kayak, a man matching Vincent's weight and size, and conditions that closely mirrored those of that ill-fated day. The experiments showed that even with the drain plug removed, the kayak didn't fill with water quickly enough to cause it to capsize. The drain hole allowed only a small amount of water to trickle in, just drops that wouldn't have been enough to cause a fatal incident. This meant that, even without the plug, Vincent's kayak could have easily made the remaining distance of about a mile or so back to shore. However, when the experiment seemed to completely disprove the theory about the plug, the prosecution shifted focus to the paddle. According to Angelica, the paddle was damaged, missing the locking ring, which investigators believed could have hindered Vincent's ability to control the kayak. But even here, the defense didn't back down. They demonstrated that the absence of the ring didn't affect the paddle's functionality. It remained sturdy, could be used effectively, and was fully operational. This didn't change the fact that during her interrogation, Angelica admitted to touching both Vincent's paddle and the plug, an admission that became the catalyst for the charges against her. To the police, all of this looked like a carefully planned crime. Even the smallest details, such as touching the paddle or accidentally brushing against the plug, were turned into grounds to suspect Angelica of deliberate actions. Yet despite the prosecution's seemingly logical narrative, the defense continued to fight. Angelica's attorney argued that her statements had been extracted under emotional duress during the interrogation. The defense brought in a false confessions expert who reviewed all 11 hours of the recorded questioning and concluded that the police had applied substantial psychological pressure. The expert claimed that the detectives used classic tactics designed to coerce a confession. They asked leading questions, played the roles of the good cop and the bad cop, didn't allow her time to process the situation, and pressured her into repeating phrases that suited their narrative. During the interrogation, Angelica often became confused, her responses grew vague, and her emotions became increasingly unstable. The expert argued that she was in a state of shock, and her words should have been treated with caution. One phrase that the detectives latched onto, her fleeting remark about having once thought about being free from the relationship, was interpreted as an admission of intent to harm Vincent. In reality, the defense claimed, this statement had no direct connection to the events of that day. It was merely a reference to their long-standing relationship issues. Angelica spoke about freedom in a broader sense, but the police chose to interpret her words differently. The interrogation expert noted that Angelica never used words like crime or even death in that context, and her admissions were more a result of manipulation by the investigators than the actual truth. The detectives, however, disregarded these details once they heard what they wanted. They dismissed any further statements Angelica made. The defense argued that Vincent's kayak had been having issues long before that fateful day, specifically that the drain plug had been faulty for months. According to Angelica, they had kayaked without the plug several times, and it never caused any serious problems. The conditions on the river that day were dangerous, but it was the weather, not any intentional actions, that led to the tragedy. Nevertheless, the prosecution remained firm in their stance. To them, it all fit together, a woman tired of the relationship, seeking financial gain, staging an accident to collect insurance money and gain freedom. Angelica's interrogation felt endless. She had lost track of time and felt cornered. At first, she tried to hold her ground, but when the police repeatedly circled back to the issue of the drain plug, her resolve weakened. Her story about the plug, whether it was there or not, became muddled, creating confusion that the investigators chose to exploit. The turning point came when a worn-down Angelica asked to leave so she could feed her cat at home. Tears welled up in her eyes, and that was the moment the detectives had been waiting for. They sensed her vulnerability and intensified the pressure. A barrage of leading questions came her way, and although she never directly confessed to a crime, the police refused to relent. An expert who later reviewed the interrogation footage noted that Angelica appeared exhausted, overwhelmed, and clearly not in a state to think clearly. Her inconsistent responses were the typical result of emotional fatigue, not a conscious admission of guilt. According to the expert, she simply wanted to escape the never-ending questioning, which led her to give several unclear answers that formed the basis of the case against her. Meanwhile, Vincent's body remained missing. His family and friends were left in limbo, with their pain growing each day. It wasn't until the morning of May 23, 2015, nearly a month after he had disappeared, that a boater finally discovered his body in the Hudson River, near the same Bannerman's Island the couple had visited on the day of the tragedy. The autopsy confirmed that the cause of death was drowning. There were no signs of foul play or struggle. Vincent's blood contained traces of alcohol, but not at a significant level, suggesting that he was mainly impacted by the harsh weather conditions and the frigid water temperature. Vincent's kayak was recovered a few days after the body was found. The drain plug was missing, and the paddle, as suspected, lacked the locking ring. Yet the absence of the ring did not affect its functionality. The defense insisted that none of these factors alone could have led to drowning. It was the combination of circumstances, the cold water, strong winds, lack of a life jacket, and the presence of alcohol. It was this combination that caused the tragedy, not any actions taken by Angelica. But the prosecution wasn't backing down. They focused on the inconsistencies in Angelica's statements, seeing them as evidence of her involvement in Vincent's death. Their theory was straightforward: she intentionally tampered with the kayak to create a situation where Vincent wouldn't survive. However, Angelica's lawyer insisted it was an unfortunate accident caused by Vincent's own recklessness. He chose to go out on the water while under the influence, without a life jacket, and in poor weather conditions. He knew the chances of surviving in the freezing water were slim, but he still took that risk. Despite Angelica maintaining her innocence, the case took a turn when the prosecution realized that pursuing a charge of intentional harm wouldn't hold. Pulling out a drain plug or breaking a paddle were complicated ways to commit a crime, and it wasn't enough to convince a jury. Furthermore, the defense's arguments were compelling, and experts confirmed that such a tragedy could indeed happen under those circumstances. At an impasse, the prosecution offered Angelica a plea deal. They proposed she plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter, which would result in just a few years in prison instead of a life sentence. She agreed. Angelica was sentenced to 4 years of imprisonment for involuntary manslaughter. However, considering the time she had already served while awaiting trial and during the court process, she had only a few months left to serve. Angelica was released on parole in December 2017, having spent 32 months in custody, less than 4 years. As part of the plea deal, she was technically sentenced to 4 years, but due to time served and early release, she ended up serving less than half that time. So, while her sentence was officially 4 years, the parole system allowed her to gain freedom earlier, in late 2017. Even after her release, tensions remained high. Vincent's family couldn't come to terms with the outcome. They believed Angelica was responsible for their son's death and were vocal about their dissatisfaction with the leniency of the sentence. Angelica, on the other hand, maintained that only she and God knew the truth. She continued to assert that she wasn't responsible for Vincent's death and that it had been a tragic accident. After her release, she faced new challenges. Deportation loomed, and she struggled to find employment. Angelica attempted to claim Vincent's insurance benefits, but her guilty plea made that impossible. 16 months later, she was forced to return to her home country, where she began to rebuild her life, leaving the nightmare of those events behind. She enrolled in a university, found a job, and continued to move forward, claiming she had fully recovered from the ordeal. Folks, there are a lot of questions in this story that we might never get clear answers to. Vincent's death, Angelica's behavior, and the conflicting testimonies all create a complex and emotionally charged picture. It's easy to get swayed by public opinion or the prosecution's narrative in such situations, but it's important to remember that the truth isn't always obvious. Personally, I believe that the justice system, especially in cases like this, can make mistakes. Interrogation tactics, pressure, and psychological exhaustion can all lead to false confessions. Angelica found herself in a situation where not only the circumstances, but also her own missteps in words and actions, worked against her. But was she truly responsible for Vincent's death, or was it just a tragic accident that spiraled into a nightmare for everyone involved? Now, I want to turn to you, the viewers. What do you think weighs heavier in this story, guilt or chance? Is Angelica a victim of judicial error, or is she truly connected to Vincent's death? What would you have done in her place? And most importantly, can we always trust conclusions drawn from conflicting evidence? I'm eager to hear your thoughts. This is the kind of story that makes you question the fine line between truth and accusation.